Chapter 51 of Tess of the d'Urbervilles.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tess of the d'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Read by Adrian Pretzelis.
Chapter 51. At length it was the eve of Old Lady Day, and the agricultural world was in a fever of mobility such as only occurs at that particular date of the year. It is a day of fulfilment. Agreements for outdoor service during the ensuing year, entered into at Candlemas, are to be now carried out. The labourers, or workfolk as they used to call themselves immemorially, till the other word was introduced from without, who wish to remain no longer in old places, are removing to the new farms. These annual migrations from farm to farm were on the increase here. When Tess's mother was a child, the majority of the field folk about Marlott had remained all their lives on one farm, which had been the home also of their fathers and grandfathers. But latterly the desire for yearly removal had risen to a high pitch. With the younger families it was a pleasant excitement which might possibly be an advantage. The Egypt of one family was the land of promise to the family who saw it from a distance, till by residence there it became in turn their Egypt also, and so they changed and changed. However, all the mutations so increasingly discernible in village life did not originate entirely in the agricultural unrest. A depopulation was also going on. The village had formerly contained, side by side with the agricultural labourers, an interesting and better informed class, ranking distinctly above the former, the class to which Tess's father and mother had belonged, and including the carpenter, the smith, the shoemaker, the huckster, together with nondescript workers other than farm labourers, a set of people who owed a certain stability of aim and conduct to the fact of their being life-holders like Tess's father, or copyholders, or occasionally small freeholders. But as the long holdings fell in, they were seldom again let to similar tenants, and were mostly pulled down, if not absolutely required by the farmer for his hands. Cottagers who were not directly employed on the land were looked upon with disfavour, and the banishment of some starved the trade of others, who were thus obliged to follow. These families, who had formed the backbone of the village life in the past, who were the depositories of the village traditions, had to seek refuge in the large centres. The process, humorously designated by statisticians as the tendency of the rural population towards the large towns, being really the tendency of water to flow uphill when forced by machinery. The cottage accommodation at Marlott having been in this manner considerably curtailed by demolitions, every house which remained standing was required by the agriculturalist for his workpeople. Ever since the occurrence of the event which had cast such a shadow over Tess's life, the d'Urberville family, whose descent was not credited, had been tacitly looked upon as one which would have to go when their lease ended, if only in the interests of morality. It was indeed quite true that the household had not been shining examples either of temperance, soberness, or chastity. The father, and even the mother, had got drunk at times, the younger children seldom had gone to church, and the eldest daughter had made queer unions. By some means the village had to be kept pure, so on this, the first Lady Day on which the d'Urbervilles were expendable, the house, being roomy, was required for a carter with a large family, and Widow Joan, her daughters Tess and 'Liza Lu, the boy Abraham, and the younger children had to go elsewhere. On the evening preceding their removal it was getting dark betimes by reason of a drizzling rain which blurred the sky. As it was the last night they would spend in the village which had been their home and birthplace, Mrs Durbeyfield, Liza Lu and Abraham had gone out to bid some friends good-bye, and Tess was keeping house till they should return. She was kneeling in the window bench, her face close to the casement, where an outer pane of rain-water was sliding down the inner pane of glass. Her eyes rested on the web of a spider, probably starved long ago, which had been mistakenly placed on a corner where no flies ever came, and shivered in the slight draught through the casement. Tess was reflecting on the position of the household in which she perceived her own evil influence. Had she not come home, her mother and the children might probably have been allowed to stay on as weekly tenants. But she had been observed almost immediately on her return by some people of scrupulous character and great influence. They had seen her idling in the churchyard, restoring as well as she could with a little trowel a baby's obliterated grave. By this means they had found that she was living here again. Her mother was scolded for harbouring her. Sharp retorts had ensued from Joan, who had independently offered to leave at once. She had been taken at her word, and here was the result. "I ought never to have come home," said Tess to herself bitterly. She was so intent upon these thoughts that she had hardly at first took note of a man in a white mackintosh whom she saw riding down the street. Possibly it was owing to her face being near to the pane that he saw her so quickly, and directed his horse so close to the cottage front that his hoofs were almost upon the narrow borders for plants growing under the wall. It was not till he touched the window with his riding crop that she observed him. The rain had nearly ceased, and she opened the casement in obedience to his gesture. "Didn't you see me?" asked d'Urberville. "I was not attending," she said. "I heard you, I believe, though I fancied it was a carriage and horses. I was in a sort of dream." "Ah, you heard the d'Urberville coach, perhaps? You know the legend, I suppose?" "No. Somebody was going to tell it to me once, but didn't." "If you are a genuine d'Urberville, I ought not to tell you either, I suppose. As for me, I'm a sham one, so it doesn't matter. It is rather dismal. It is that this sound of a non-existent coach can only be heard by one of d'Urberville blood, and it is held to be of ill omen to the one who hears it. It has to do with a murder committed by one of the family centuries ago." "Now you have begun it, finish it." "Very well. One of the family is said to have abducted some beautiful woman who tried to escape from the coach in which he was carrying her off, and in the struggle he killed her, or she killed him, I forget which. Such is one version of the tale. I see that your tubs and buckets are packed. Going away, aren't you?" "Yes, tomorrow, Old Lady Day." "I heard you were, but I could hardly believe it. It seemed so sudden. Why is it?" "Father's was the last life on the property, and when that dropped we had no further right to stay, though we might perhaps have stayed as weekly tenants if it had not been for me." "What about you?" "I'm not a proper woman." D'Urberville's face flushed. "What a blasted shame! Miserable snobs! May their dirty souls be burnt to cinders!" he exclaimed in tones of ironic resentment. "That's why you're going, is it? Turned out?" "We are not turned out exactly, but as they said we should have to go soon. It was best to go now everybody was moving, because there are better chances." "Where are you going to?" "Kingsbere. We have taken rooms there. Mother is so foolish about father's people that she will go there." "But your mother's family are not fit for lodgings, and in a little hole of a town like that. Now, why not come to my garden house at Trantridge? There are hardly any peltry now since my mother's death, but there's the house as you know it, and the garden. It can be whitewashed in a day, and your mother can live there quite comfortably, and I will put the children to a good school. Really, I ought to do something for you." "But we have already taken the rooms at Kingsbere," she declared, "and we can wait there." "Wait? For what? For that nice husband, no doubt. Now look here, Tess, I know what men are, and, bearing in mind the grounds of your separation, I'm quite positive he will never make it up with you. Now, though I have been your enemy, I am your friend, even if you won't believe it. Come to this cottage of mine. We'll get up a regular colony of fowls, and your mother can attend them excellently, and the children can go to school." Tess breathed more and more quickly, and at length she said, "How do I know that you would do all this? Your views may change, and then my mother would be homeless again." "Oh, no, no. I would guarantee you against such as that in writing if necessary. Think it over." Tess shook her head, but d'Urberville persisted. She had seldom seen him so determined. He would not take a negative. "Please just tell your mother," he said in emphatic tones. "It is her business to judge, not yours. I shall get the house swept out and whitened to-morrow morning, and fires lit, and it will be dry by the evening, so that you can come straight there. Now mind, I shall expect you." Tess again shook her head, her throat swelling with complicated emotion. She could not look up at d'Urberville. "I owe you something for the past, you know," he resumed, "and you cured me too of that craze. I'm so glad." "I would rather you had kept the craze, so that you had kept the practice that went with it." "I am glad of this opportunity of repaying you a little. To-morrow I shall expect to hear your mother's goods unloading. Give me your hand now. Dear, beautiful Tess." With the last sentence he had dropped his voice to a murmur, and put his hand in at the half-open casement. With stormy eyes she pulled the stay-bar quickly, and in doing so caught his arm between the casement and the stone mullion. "Damnation! You are very cruel," he said, snatching out his arm. "No, no, I know you didn't do it on purpose. Well, I shall expect you, or your mother and children at least." "I shall not come. I have plenty of money," she cried. "Where?" "At my father-in-law's, if I ask for it." "If you ask for it. But you won't, Tess. I know you. You'll never ask for it. You'll starve first." With these words he rode off. Just at the corner of the street he met the man with the paint-pot, who asked him if he had deserted the brethren. "You go to the devil," said d'Urberville. Tess remained where she was a long while, till a sudden rebellious sense of injustice caused the region of her eyes to swell with the rush of hot tears thither. Her husband, Angel Clare himself, had, like others, dealt out hard measure to her. Surely he had. She had never before admitted such a thought, but he had surely. Never in her life, she could swear it from the bottom of her soul, had she ever intended to do wrong. Yet these hard judgments had come. Whatever her sins, they were not sins of intention, but of inadvertence. And why should she have been punished so persistently? She passionately seized the first piece of paper that came to hand, and scribbled the following lines. "Oh, why have you treated me so monstrously, Angel? I do not deserve it. I have thought it all over carefully, and I can never, never forgive you. You know that I did not intend to wrong you. Why have you so wronged me? You are cruel, cruel indeed. I will try to forget you. It is all injustice I have received at your hands. T." She watched till the postman passed by, ran out to him with her epistle, and then again took her listless place inside the window panes. It was just as well to write like that as to write tenderly. How could he give way to entreaty? The facts had not changed. There was no new event to alter his opinion. It grew darker, the firelight shining over the room. The two biggest of the younger children had gone out with their mother. The four smallest, their ages ranging from 3½ years to 11, all in black frocks, were gathered round the hearth, babbling their own little subjects. Tess at length joined them, without lighting a candle. "This is the last night we shall sleep here, dears, in the house where we were born," she said quickly. "We ought to think of it, oughtn't we?" They all became silent. With the impressibility of their age, they were ready to burst into tears at the picture of finality she had conjured up, though all the day hitherto they had been rejoicing in the idea of a new place. Tess changed the subject. "Sing to me, dears," she said. "What shall we sing?" "Anything, you know. I don't mind." There was a momentary pause. It was broken first in one little tentative note. Then a second voice strengthened it, and a third and a fourth chimed in unison, with words they had learned at the Sunday school. "Here we suffer grief and pain, here we meet to part again. In heaven we part no more." The four sang on with the phlegmatic passivity of persons who had long ago settled the question, and there being no mistake about it, felt that further thought was not required. With features strained hard to enunciate the syllables, they continued to regard the centre of the flickering fire, the notes of the youngest straying over into the pauses of the rest. Tess turned from them and went to the window again. Darkness had now fallen without, and she put her face to the pane as though to peer into the gloom. It was really to hide her tears. If she could only believe what the children were singing, if she were only sure, how different all would now be, how confidently she would leave them to Providence and their future kingdom. But in default of that it behoved her to do something, to be their Providence. For to Tess, as to not a few millions of others, there was a ghastly satire in the poet's lines: "Not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come." To her and her like, birth itself was an ordeal of degrading personal compulsion, whose gratuitousness nothing in the result seemed to justify, and at best could only palliate. In the shades of the wet road she soon discerned her mother, with tall 'Liza Lu and Abraham. Mrs Durbeyfield's pattens clicked up to the door, and Tess opened it. "I see the tracks of a horse outside the door," said Joan. "Have somebody called?" "No," said Tess. The children by the fire looked gravely at her, and one murmured, "Why, Tess, the gentleman a horseback." "He didn't call," said Tess. "He spoke to me in passing." "Who was the gentleman?" asked her mother. "Your husband?" "No, he'll never come," answered Tess in stony hopelessness. "Then who was it?" "Oh, you needn't ask. You've seen him before, and so have I." "Ah, what did he say?" said Joan curiously. "I will tell you when we're settled in our lodging at Kingsbere to-morrow, every word." It was not her husband, she had said, yet a consciousness that in a physical sense this man alone was her husband seemed to weigh on her more and more. End of chapter 51. Chapter 52 of Tess of the d'Urbervilles.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tess of the d'Urbervilles, by Thomas Hardy. Read by Adrian Pretzelis.
Chapter 52. During the small hours of the next morning, while it was still dark, dwellers near the highways were conscious of a disturbance of their night's rest by rumbling noises intermittently continuing till daylight, noises as certain to reoccur in this particular first week of the month as the voice of the cuckoo in the third week of the same. They were the preliminaries of the general removal, the passing of the empty waggons and teams to fetch the goods of the migrating families, for it was always by the vehicle of the farmer who required his services that the hired man was conveyed to his destination. That this might be accomplished within the day was the explanation of the reverberation occurring so soon after midnight, the aim of the carters being to reach the door of the outgoing households by 6 o'clock, when the loading of their movables at once began. But to Tess and her mother's household no such anxious farmer sent his team. They were only women. They were not regular labourers. They were not particularly required anywhere. Hence they had to hire a waggon at their own expense, and got nothing sent gratuitously. It was a relief to Tess, when she looked out of the window that morning, to find that although the weather was windy and lowering, it did not rain, and that the waggon had come. A wet Lady Day was a spectre which removing families never forgot. Damp furniture, damp bedding, damp clothing accompanied it, and left a train of ills. Her mother, Liza Lu, and Abraham were also awake, but the younger children were let sleep on. The four breakfasted by the thin light, and the house ridding was taken in hand. It proceeded with some cheerfulness, a friendly neighbour or two assisting. When the large articles of furniture had been packed in position, a circular nest was made of the beds and bedding, in which Joan Durbeyfield and the young children were to sit through the journey. After loading there was a long delay before the horses were brought, those having been unharnessed during the ridding, but at length, about 2 o'clock, the whole was under way, the cooking pot swinging from the axle of the waggon, Mrs Durbeyfield and family at the top, the matron having in her lap, to prevent injury to its works, the head of the clock, which, at any exceptional lurch of the waggon, struck 1 or 1.5 in hurt tones. Tess and the next eldest girl walked alongside till they were out of the village. They had called on a few neighbours that morning and the previous evening, and some came to see them off, all wishing them well, though in their secret hearts hardly expecting welfare possible to such a family, harmless as the Durbeyfields were to all except themselves. Soon the equipage began to ascend to higher ground, and the wind grew keener with the change of level and soil. The day being the 6th of April, the Durbeyfield waggon met many other waggons with families on the summit of the load, which was built on a well-nigh unvarying principle, as peculiar probably to the rural labourer as the hexagon to the bee. The groundwork of the arrangement was the family dresser, which, with its shining handles and finger marks, and domestic evidences thick upon it, stood importantly in front, over the tails of the shaft horses, in its erect and natural position, like some ark of the covenant that they were bound to carry reverently. Some of the households were lively, some mournful. Some were stopping at the doors of wayside inns, where in due time the Durbeyfield menagerie also drew up to bait horses and to refresh the travellers. During the halt Tess's eye fell upon a 3-pint blue mug, which was ascending and descending through the air to and from the feminine section of a household sitting on the summit of a load that had also drawn up at a little distance from the same inn. She followed one of the mug's journeys upward, and perceived it to be clasped by hands whose owner she well knew. Tess went towards the waggon. "Marian and Izz!" she cried to the girls, for it was they, sitting with the moving family at whose house they had lodged. "Are you house-ridden to-day, like everybody else?" They were, they said. It had been too rough a life for them at Flintcomb, and they had come away almost without notice, leaving Groby to prosecute them if he chose. They told Tess their destination, and Tess told them hers. Marian leant over the load and lowered her voice. "Do you know that the gentleman who follows 'ee, you'll guess who I mean, came to ask for 'ee at Flintcomb after you'd gone? We didn't tell en where you was, knowing you wouldn't wish to see him." "Ah, but I did see him," Tess murmured. "He found me." "And do he know where you be going?" "I think so." "Husband come back?" "No." She bade her acquaintance good-bye, for the respective carters had now come in from the inn, and the two waggons resumed their journey in opposite directions. The vehicle whereupon sat Marian, Izz, and the ploughman's family with whom they had thrown in their lot, being brightly painted and drawn by 3 powerful horses with shining brass ornaments on their harness, while the waggon on which Mrs Durbeyfield and her family rode was a creaking erection that would scarcely bear the weight of the superincumbent load, one which had known no paint since it was made, and drawn by 2 horses only. The contrast well marked the difference between being fetched by a thriving farmer and conveying oneself whither no hirer wanted one's coming. The distance was great, too great for a day's journey, and it was with the utmost difficulty that the horses performed it. Though they had started so early, it was quite late in the afternoon when they had turned the flank of an eminence which formed part of the upland called Green Hill. While the horses stood to stale and breathed themselves, Tess looked around. Under the hill, and just ahead of them, was the half-dead townlet of their pilgrimage, Kingsbere, where lay those ancestors of whom her father had spoken and sung to painfulness. Kingsbere, the spot of all spots in the world which would be considered the d'Urbervilles' home, since they had resided there for full 500 years. A man could be seen advancing from the outskirts towards them, and when he beheld the nature of their waggon load he quickened his steps. "You be the woman they call Mrs Durbeyfield, I reckon," he said to Tess's mother, who had descended to walk the remainder of the way. She nodded. "The widow of the late Sir John d'Urberville, poor nobleman, if I care for my rights, and returning to the domain of his forefathers." "Oh, well, I know nothing about that. But if you be Mrs Durbeyfield, I am sent to tell 'ee that the rooms you wanted be let. We didn't know that you was coming till we got your letter this morning, when 'twas too late. But no doubt you can get other lodgings somewhere." The man had noticed the face of Tess, which had become ash pale at his intelligence. Her mother looked hopelessly at fault. "What shall we do now, Tess?" she said bitterly. "Here's a welcome to your ancestors' lands. However, let's try further." They moved on into the town, and tried with all their might, Tess remaining with the waggon to take care of the children, whilst her mother and 'Liza Lu made inquiries. At the last return of Joan to the vehicle, an hour later, when her search for accommodation had still been fruitless, the driver of the waggon said the goods must be unloaded, as the horses were half dead, and he was bound to return part of the way at least that night. "Very well, unload it there," said Joan recklessly. "I'll get shelter somewhere." The waggon had drawn up under the churchyard wall, in a spot screened from view, and the driver, nothing loth, soon hauled down the poor heap of household goods. This done, she paid him, reducing herself almost to her last shilling thereby, and he moved off and left them, only too glad to get out of further dealings with such a family. It was a dry night, and he guessed that they would come to no harm. Tess gazed desperately at the pile of furniture. The cold sunlight of this spring evening peered invidiously upon the crocks and kettles, upon the bunches of dried herbs shivering in the breeze, upon the brass handles of the dresser, upon the wicker cradle that they had all been rocked in, and upon the well-rubbed clock-case, all of which gave out the reproachful gleam of indoor articles abandoned to the vicissitudes of a ruthless exposure for which they were never made. Round about were deep-harked hills and slopes, now cut up into little paddocks, and the green foundations that showed where the d'Urberville mansion had once stood. Also an outlying stretch of Egdon Heath that had always belonged to the estate. Hard by, the aisle of the church, called the d'Urberville aisle, looked on imperturbably. "Isn't your family vault your own freehold?" asked Tess's mother, as she returned from a reconnoitre of the church and graveyard. "Why, of course it is, and that's where we will camp, girls, till the place of your ancestors finds us a roof. Now, Tess and Liza and Abraham, you help me. We'll make a nest for these children, and then we'll have another look around." Tess listlessly lent a hand, and in a quarter of an hour the old four-post bedstead was disassociated from the heap of goods, and erected under the south wall of the church, the part of the building known as the d'Urberville aisle, beneath which the huge vaults lay. Over the tester of the bedstead was a beautiful traceried window of many lights, its date being the 15th century. It was called the d'Urberville window, and in the upper part could be discerned heraldic emblems like those on d'Urberville's old seal and spoon. Joan drew the curtains round the bed so as to make an excellent tent of it, and put the smaller children inside. "If it comes to the worst we can sleep there too for one night," she said. "But let us try further on and get something for the dears to eat. Oh, Tess, what's the use of your playing at marrying gentlemen if it leaves us like this?" Accompanied by 'Liza Lu and the boy, she again ascended the little lane which secluded the church from the townlet. As soon as they got into the street they beheld a man on horseback gazing up and down. "Ah, I'm looking for you," he said, riding up to them. "This is indeed a family gathering on the historic spot." It was Alec d'Urberville. "Where is Tess?" he asked. Personally, Joan had no liking for Alec. She cursorily signified the direction of the church and went on, d'Urberville saying that he would see them again, in case they should still be unsuccessful in their search for shelter, of which he had just heard. When they had gone, d'Urberville rode to the inn, and shortly after came out on foot. In the interim Tess, left with the children inside the bedstead, remained talking with them a while, till, seeing that no more could be done to make them comfortable just then, she walked about the churchyard, now beginning to be embrowned by the shades of nightfall. The door of the church was unfastened, and she entered it for the first time in her life. Within the window, under which the bedstead stood, were the tombs of the family, covering in their dates several centuries. They were canopied, altar-shaped, and plain, their carvings being defaced and broken, their brasses torn from the matrices, the rivet holes remaining like martin holes in a sand cliff. All of the reminders that she had ever received that her people were socially extinct, there was none so forcible as this spoliation. She drew near to a dark stone on which was inscribed "Ostium Sepulchri, Antiquae Famillae d'Urberville." Tess did not read Church Latin like a cardinal, but she knew that this was the door of her ancient sepulchre, and that the tall knights of whom her father had chanted in his cups lay inside. She musingly turned to withdraw, passing near an altar tomb, the oldest of them all, on which was a recumbent figure. In the dusk she had not noticed it before, and would hardly have noticed it now but for an odd fancy that the effigy moved. As soon as she drew close to it she discovered all in a moment that the figure was a living person, and the shock to her sense of not having been alone was so violent that she was quite overcome, and sank down nigh to fainting, not, however, till she had recognized Alec d'Urberville in the form. He leapt off the slab and supported her. "I saw you come in," he said, smiling, "and got up there not to interrupt your meditations. A family gathering, is it not, with these old fellows under us here? Listen." He stamped with his heel heavily on the floor, whereupon there arose a hollow echo from below. "That shook 'em a bit, I'll warrant," he continued. "And you thought I was the mere stone reproduction of one of them. But no, the old order changeth. The little finger of the sham d'Urberville can do more for you than the whole dynasty of the real underneath. Now command me. What shall I do?" "Go away," she murmured. "I will. I'll look for your mother," said he blandly. But in passing her he whispered, "Mind this, you'll be civil yet." When he was gone she bent down upon the entrance to the vaults and said, "Why am I on the wrong side of this door?" In the meantime Marian and Izz Huett had journeyed onwards with the chattels of the ploughman in the direction of their land of Canaan, the Egypt of some other family who had left it only that morning. But the girls did not for a long time think of where they were going. Their talk was of Angel Clare and Tess, and Tess's persistent lover, whose connection with her previous history they had partly heard and partly guessed ere this. "'Tisn't as though she'd never known him afore," said Marian. "His having won her once makes all the difference in the world. 'Twould be 1,000 pities if he were to tole her away again. Mr Clare can never be anything to us, Izz, and why should we grudge him to her, and not try to mend this quarrel? If he could only know what straits she's put to, and what's hovering around, he might come to take care of his own." "Could we let him know?" They thought of this all the way to their destination, but the bustle of re-establishment in their new place took up all their attention then, and when they were settled, a month later, they heard of Clare's approaching return, though they had learnt nothing more of Tess. Upon that, agitated anew by their attachment to him, yet honourably disposed to her, Marian uncorked the penny ink bottle they shared, and a few lines were concocted between the two girls. "Honoured Sir, look to your wife if you do love her as much as she do love you, for she is sore put to by an enemy in the shape of a friend. Sir, there is one near her who ought to be away. A woman should not be tried beyond her strength, and continual dropping will wear away a stone, ay, more, a diamond. From two well-wishers." This was addressed to Angel Clare at the only place they had ever heard him to be connected with, Emminster Vicarage, after which they continued in a mood of emotional exultation at their own generosity, which made them sing in hysterical snatches and weep at the same time. End of chapter 52. End of Phase the 6th. Chapters 53 and 54 of Tess of the d'Urbervilles.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tess of the d'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Read by Adrian Pretzelis.
Phase the 7th. Fulfilment. Chapter 53. It was evening at Emminster Vicarage. The 2 customary candles were burning under their green shades in the vicar's study, but he had not been sitting there. Occasionally he came in, stirred the small fire which sufficed for the increasing mildness of the spring, and went out again, sometimes pausing at the front door, going on to the drawing-room, then returning again to the front door. It faced westward, and though the gloom prevailed inside, there was still light enough without to see with distinctness. Mrs. Clare, who had been sitting in the drawing-room, followed him hither. "Plenty of time yet," said the vicar. "He doesn't reach Chalk Newton till 6, even if the train should be punctual, and 10 miles of country road, 5 of them in Crimmercrock Lane, are not jogged over in a hurry by our old horse." "But he has done it in an hour with us, my dear." "Years ago." Thus they passed the minutes, each well knowing that this was only a waste of breath, the one essential being simply to wait. At length there was a slight noise in the lane, and the old pony chaise appeared indeed outside the railings. They saw alight therefrom a form which they affected to recognize, but would actually have passed by in the street without identifying, had he not got out of their carriage at the particular moment when a particular person was due. Mrs. Clare rushed through the dark passage to the door, and her husband came more slowly after her. The new arrival, who was just about to enter, saw their anxious faces in the doorway, and the gleam of the west in their spectacles, because they confronted the last rays of day, but they could only see his shape against the light. "Oh, my boy, come home again at last," said Mrs. Clare, who cared no more at that moment for the stains of heterodoxy which had caused all this separation than for the dust upon his clothes. What woman indeed, among the most faithful adherents of the truth, believes the promises and threats of the Word in the sense in which she believes in her own children, or would not throw her theology to the wind if weighted against their happiness? As soon as they reached the room where the candles were lighted, she looked at his face. "Oh, it is not Angel, not my son, the Angel who went away!" she cried in all the irony of sorrow, as she turned herself aside. His father too was shocked to see him, so reduced was that figure from its former contours by worry and the bad season that Clare had experienced in the climate to which he had so rashly hurried in his first aversion to the mockery of events at home. You could see the skeleton behind the man, and almost the ghost behind the skeleton. He matched Crivelli's dead Christus. His sunken eye-pits were of morbid hue, and the light in his eyes had waned. The angular hollows and lines of his aged ancestors had succeeded to their reign in his face 20 years before their time. "I was ill over there, you know," he said. "I'm all right now." As if, however, to falsify this assertion, his leg seemed to give way, and he suddenly sat down to save himself from falling. It was only a slight attack of faintness, resulting from the tedious day's journey and the excitement of arrival. "Has any letter come for me to-day?" he asked. "I received the last you sent on by the merest chance, and after considerable delay through being inland, or I might have come sooner." "It was from your wife, we supposed?" "It was." Only one other had recently come. They had not sent it on to him, knowing he would start for home so soon. He hastily opened the letter produced, and was much disturbed to read in Tess's handwriting the sentiments expressed in her last hurried scrawl to him. "Oh, why have you treated me so monstrously, Angel? I do not deserve it. I have thought it all over carefully, and I can never, never forgive you. You know that I did not intend to wrong you. Why have you so wronged me? You are cruel, cruel indeed. I will try to forget you. It is all injustice I have received at your hands. T. It is quite true, said Angel, throwing down the letter. Perhaps she will never be reconciled to me. Don't, Angel, be so anxious about a mere child of the soil, said his mother. Child of the soil? Well, we are all children of the soil. I wish she were so in the sense you mean. But let me now explain to you what I have never explained before, that her father is a descendant in the male line of one of the oldest Norman houses, like a good many others who lead obscure agricultural lives in our villages and are dubbed sons of the soil. He soon retired to bed, and the next morning, feeling exceedingly unwell, he remained in his room, pondering. The circumstances amid which he had left Tess were such that though, while on the south of the equator and just in receipt of her loving epistle, it had seemed the easiest thing in the world to rush back into her arms the moment he chose to forgive her, now that he had arrived it was not so easy as it had seemed. She was passionate, and her present letter, showing that her estimate of him had changed under his delay, too justly changed, he sadly owned, made him ask himself if it would be wise to confront her unannounced in the presence of her parents. Supposing that her love had indeed turned to dislike during the last weeks of separation, a sudden meeting might lead to bitter words. Clare therefore thought it would be best to prepare Tess and her family by sending a line to Marlott announcing his return, and his hope that she was still living with them there, as he had arranged for her to do when he left England. He dispatched the inquiry that very day, and before the week was out there came a short reply from Mrs Durbeyfield, which did not remove his embarrassment, for it bore no address, though to his surprise it was not written from Marlott. Sir, I write these few lines to say that my daughter is away from me at present, and I am not sure when she will return, but I will let you know as soon as she do. I do not feel at liberty to tell you where she is temporarily biding. I should say that me and my family have left Marlott for some time. Yours, J. Durbeyfield. It was such a relief to Clare to hear that Tess was at least apparently well, that her mother's stiff reticence as to her whereabouts did not long distress him. They were all angry with him evidently. He would wait till Mrs Durbeyfield could inform him of Tess's return, which her letter implied to be soon. He deserved no more. His had been a love which alters when it alteration finds. He had undergone some strange experiences in his absence. He had seen the virtual Faustina in the literal Cornelia, a spiritual Lucretia in a corporeal Phryne. He had thought of the woman taken and set in the midst as one deserving to be stoned, and of the wife of Uriah being made a queen, and he had asked himself why he had not judged Tess constructively rather than biographically, by the will rather than by the deed. A day or two passed while he waited at his father's house for the promised second note from Joan Durbeyfield, and indirectly to recover a little more strength. The strength showed signs of coming back, but there was no sign of Joan's letter. Then he hunted up the old letter sent on to him in Brazil, which Tess had written from Flint Camash, and reread it. The sentences touched him now as much as when he had first perused them. I must cry to you in my trouble. I have no one else. I think I must die if you do not come soon, or tell me to come to you. Please, please, not to be just, only a little kind to me. If you would come, I could die in your arms. I would be well content to do that, if so be you had forgiven me. If you will send me one little line and say I am coming, I will bide on, Angel, oh, so cheerfully. Think how it do hurt my head not to see you ever, ever. Ah, if I could only make your dear heart ache one little minute of each day, as mine does every day and all day long, it might lead you to show pity to your poor lonely one. I would be content, aye, glad, to live with you as your servant, if I may not as your wife, so that I could only be near you, and get glimpses of you, and think of you as mine. I long for only one thing in heaven or earth, or under the earth, to meet you, my own dear. Come to me, and save me from what threatens me." Clare determined that he would not believe in her more recent and severer regard of him, but would go and find her immediately. He asked his father if she had applied for any money during his absence. His father returned a negative, and then for the first time it occurred to Angel that her pride had stood in her way, and that she had suffered privation. From his remarks his parents now gathered the real reason of the separation, and their Christianity was such that, reprobates being their especial care, the tenderness towards Tess which her blood, her simplicity, even her poverty had not engendered, was instantly excited by her sin. Whilst he was hastily packing together a few articles for his journey, he glanced over a poor plain missive, also lately come to hand, the one from Marian and Izz Hewitt, beginning, "Honoured Sir, look to your wife if you do love her as much as she do love you," and signed, "From two well-wishers." End of chapter 53. Chapter 54. In a quarter of an hour Clare was leaving the house, whence his mother watched his thin figure as it disappeared into the street. He had declined to borrow his father's old mare, well knowing of its necessity to the household. He went to the inn, where he hired a trap, and could hardly wait during the harnessing. In a very few minutes after he was driving up the hill out of the town, which 3 or 4 months earlier in the year Tess had descended with such hopes and ascended with such shattered purposes. Benville Lane soon stretched before him, its hedges and trees purple with buds. But he was looking at other things, and only recalled himself to the scene sufficiently to enable him to keep the way. In something less than an hour and a half he had skirted the south of the King's Hintock estates, and ascended to the untoward solitude of Cross in Hand, the unholy stone whereupon Tess had been compelled by Alec d'Urberville, in his whim of reformation, to swear the strange oath that she would never wilfully tempt him again. The pale and blasted nettle stems of the preceding year even now lingered nakedly in the banks, young green nettles of the present spring growing from their roots. Hence he went along the verge of the upland overhanging the other Hintocks, and turning to the right plunged into the bracing calcareous region of Flintcomb, the address from which she had written to him in one of her letters, and which he supposed to be the place of sojourn referred to by her mother. Here, of course, he did not find her. What added to his depression was the discovery that no Mrs Clare had ever been heard of by the cottagers or by the farmer himself, though Tess was remembered well enough by her Christian name. His name she had obviously never used during her separation, and her dignified sense of their total severance was shown not much less by this abstention than by the hardships she had chosen to undergo, of which he now learnt for the first time, rather than apply to his father for more funds. From this place they told him Tess Durbeyfield had gone, without due notice, to the home of her parents on the other side of Blackmoor, and it therefore became necessary to find Mrs Durbeyfield. She had told him she was not now at Marlott, but had been curiously reticent as to her actual address, and the only course was to go to Marlott and inquire for it. The farmer who had been so churlish with Tess was quite smooth-tongued to Clare, and lent him a horse and a man to drive him towards Marlott, the gig he had arrived in being sent back to Emminster, for the limit of a day's journey with that horse was reached. Clare would not accept the loan of the farmer's vehicle for a further distance than to the outskirts of the Vale, and sending it back with the man who had driven him, he put up at an inn, and next day entered on foot the region wherein was the spot of his dear Tess's birth. It was as yet too early in the year for much colour to appear in the gardens and foliage. The so-called spring was but winter, overlaid with a thin coat of greenness, and it was of a parcel with his expectations. The house in which Tess had passed the years of her childhood was now inhabited by another family who had never known her. The new residents were in the garden, taking as much interest in their own doings as if the homestead had never passed its primal time in conjunction with the histories of others, besides which the histories of these were but a tale told by an idiot. They walked about the garden's path with thoughts of their own concerns entirely uppermost, bringing their actions at every moment in jarring collision with the dim ghosts behind them, talking as though the time when Tess lived there were not one whit intenser in story than now. Even the spring birds sang over their heads as if they thought there was nobody missing in particular. On inquiry of these precious innocents, to whom even the name of their predecessors was a failing memory, Clare learned that John Durbeyfield was dead, that his widow and children had left Marlott, declaring that they were going to live at Kingsbere, but instead of doing so had gone on to another place they mentioned. By this time Clare abhorred the house for ceasing to contain Tess, and hastened back from its hated presence without once looking back. His way was by the field in which he had first beheld her at the dance. It was as bad as the house, even worse. He passed on through the churchyard, where, amongst the new headstones, he saw one of a somewhat superior design to the rest. The inscription ran thus: "In memory of John Durbeyfield, rightly d'Urberville, of the once powerful family of that name, and direct descendant through an illustrious line from Sir Pagan d'Urberville, one of the Knights of the Conqueror, died March 10th, 18 How are the mighty fallen." Some man, apparently the sexton, had observed Clare standing there, and drew nigh. "Ah, sir, that's a man who didn't want to lie here, and wished to be carried to Kingsbere, where his ancestors be." "And why didn't they respect his wish?" "Oh, no money, bless your soul, sir. Why, there, I wouldn't wish to say it everywhere, but even this headstone, for all the flourish wrote upon un, is not paid for." "Ah, who put it up?" The man told the name of a mason in the village, and on leaving the churchyard Clare called at the mason's house. He found that the statement was true, and paid the bill. This done, he turned in the direction of the migrants. The distance was too long for a walk, but Clare felt such a strong desire for isolation that at first he would neither hire a conveyance nor go to a circuitous line of railway by which he might eventually reach the place. At Shaston, however, he found he must hire, but the way was such that he did not enter Joan's Place until about 7 o'clock in the evening, having traversed a distance of over 20 miles since leaving Marlott. The village being small, he had little difficulty in finding Mrs Durbeyfield's tenement, which was a house in a walled garden, remote from the main road, where she had stowed away her clumsy old furniture as best she could. It was plain that for some reason or other she had not wished him to visit her, and he felt his call to be somewhat of an intrusion. She came to the door herself, and the light from the evening sky fell upon her face. It was the first time that Clare had ever met her, but he was too preoccupied to observe more than she was still a handsome woman in the garb of a respectable widow. He was obliged to explain that he was Tess's husband, and his object in coming here, and he did it awkwardly enough. "I want to see her at once," he added. "You said you would write to me again, but you have not done so." "Because she've not come home," said Joan. "Do you know if she's well?" "I don't, but you ought to, sir," said she. "I admit it. Where is she staying?" From the beginning of the interview Joan had disclosed her embarrassment by keeping her hand to the side of her cheek. "I don't know exactly where she is staying," she answered. "She was, but—" "Where was she?" "Well, she is not there now." In her evasiveness she paused again, and the younger children had by this time crept to the door, where, pulling at his mother's skirts, the youngest murmured, "Is this the gentleman who's going to marry Tess?" "He has married her," Joan whispered. "Go inside." Clare saw her efforts for reticence, and asked, "Do you think Tess would wish me to try to find her? If not, of course—" "I don't think she would." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure she wouldn't." He was turning away, and then he thought of Tess's tender letter. "I am sure she would," he retorted passionately. "I know her better than you do." "That's very likely, sir, for I have never really known her." "Please tell me her address, Mrs Durbeyfield, in kindness to a lonely, wretched man." Tess's mother again restlessly swept her cheek with her vertical hand, and seeing that he suffered, she at last said in a low voice, "She is at Sandbourne." "Ah, where there? Sandbourne has become a large place, they say." "I don't know more particularly than I have said. Sandbourne. For myself, I was never there." It was apparent that Joan spoke the truth in this, and he pressed her no more. "Are you in want of anything?" he said gently. "No, sir," she replied. "We are fairly well provided for." Without entering the house, Clare turned away. There was a station 3 miles ahead, and paying off his coachman he walked thither. The last train to Sandbourne left shortly after, and it bore Clare on its wheels. End of chapter 54